Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our Culturama event here this evening. My name is Jill Gold Wright, and I am one of the faculty members of the English department at Mount SAC, and I am also a committee member of our Culturama committee. And the whole purpose of Culturama is to bring all kinds of different experiences, different lectures, different forms of ideas to the Mount SAC community, whether you be a student or whether you be a community member for wherever you're zooming in from. I'm really happy that you're here. Today's topic is to talk about the Jewish holiday of Passover. And the way that I kind of thought that I would do it is to give a little introduction and explain a little bit about what the whole thing is about and how Passover is celebrated and excuse me, and how it is observed by Jewish families, mostly in the United States, but I'll talk about some of the other differences as well. And because we have such a small group, I'd really like to welcome your questions, welcome your comments. There's a lot of information, but you probably already have some questions about Passover. And so there will be lots of opportunity for us to engage in discussions. And certainly I will answer your questions the best I can. So let me just start off with just some background information about this holiday. So Passover, which is what it's called in English, Pesach is what it's called in Hebrew. This is the celebration of the Jews' exodus from Egypt, which you read about in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus. So the very story that you read in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is the story that is told every year at the Passover table. And in fact, it's one of the oldest Jewish holidays on the calendar, because in the Bible, there is a lot of conversation of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread is in fact matzah, which is the bread or the cracker, whatever. I'll talk to you about what matzah is, but that's what we eat during Passover week. And it was something different in the Bible, obviously, than what it is now, but it's still the same holiday. Another thing that I want to say to you about this right off the top is that a lot of people are aware of the fact that when in Jesus's lifetime, when he attended what we now call as the Last Supper, that the Last Supper was in fact a Passover Seder. However, the way that Passover was celebrated in Jesus's time is not the way that Passover is celebrated now, right? There's a lot of difference between the way that Jews observed holidays when the first temple was standing and the way that Jews celebrate holidays now. So as I'm going through and explaining to you what the Passover dinner is like, I don't want you to think that that's what Jesus and the apostles were doing. It's not. So just wanted to clarify that. I've been lucky enough to be invited to teach about Passover at different churches, and they are different congregations are very interested in the Passover Seder, knowing that the Last Supper was in fact an observance of Passover. But I always like to be very clear about the fact that what I'm teaching now is not what was done in biblical Judaism. So there are Jewish houses of worship, which are called synagogues or temples. But the Passover Seder does not really take place in synagogues. It mostly takes place in the home. It is a home observance. Sometimes there'll be a community Seder or a community Passover that'll take place on one of the later nights of Passovers in a synagogue, but mostly it takes place in the home. So I am zooming in to you right now from my home. And this is where I and my family will be celebrating Passover this weekend. By the way, this weekend, this year, 2022, is pretty interesting in that there are 3 major religious holidays all intersecting on the calendar this spring. So Passover, Easter, and Ramadan, which is a major spring holiday on the Islamic calendar. All 3 of those holidays are intersecting, which is really beautiful. It's really ecumenical and lovely. It does not always happen that way because the holidays on the Jewish calendar are based on not the secular calendar that we use in the United States of America, but based on a Hebrew calendar. And the Hebrew calendar has 13 months. It's a lunar calendar, and it has 13 months. So even though Passover or Pesach is always the same date on the Hebrew calendar, it doesn't always fall down that way on the secular American calendar, right? So this is why, for example, sometimes kids are on spring break during Passover. Sometimes kids are not on spring break during Passover. You might have heard just from like kind of being around that sometimes Hanukkah, which is the winter holiday, overlaps with Christmas. Sometimes it does not. And you think, why is that? Because Christmas is the same every year, and it is. It's December 25th. Whatever happens, it's December 25th, right? But Jewish holidays don't work that way. Jewish holidays work according to the Hebrew dates, and so they fall down differently on the secular or American calendar. So what do we do when we all sit around our table at home celebrating Passover? How is it different from any other family dinner or any other holiday? Well, the difference is that there is, before the meal, a quite long service that takes place at the table. And that service is called a Seder. So we might spell that S-E-D-E-R, Seder. And Seder in Hebrew means order, like the order that things happen. Okay. And there is a very traditional and ritualized order of different prayers that are said and different foods that are eaten and different ways to tell the story of the Exodus that are all part of the Seder before the meal is served. Okay. And one of the things that happens during the Seder meal is that there is a Seder plate with very ritualized symbols and foods. So what I'd like to do is actually kind of tell you about a Seder plate, and I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of Seder plates so that you can kind of have a sense of what a Seder plate looks like. So I actually have 2 Seder plates right in front of me that I'd like to show you. This one was my grandma's. And this is a Seder plate that says these Hebrew letters in the middle here say Pesach, which is Passover. And then you can see there are little wells for all of these traditional foods to be held on the Seder plate. And I'll go over what all those foods are, but every Seder plate will have a space for all of those foods. And the Seder plate will then have all of the foods put on them, and it will be in the middle of the table. And during the Seder, we will point to the different ritual items and talk about them. So this is a very traditional looking Seder plate. I'm going to show you the Seder plate that I got for my wedding. Let me rephrase that I chose for my wedding. And you can see it's got a very different style. It's very floral. It's very decorative, but it also says Pesach in the middle in the Hebrew letters. And it also has wells for all of the ritual foods. Both of these Seder plates are made out of porcelain, but Seder plates don't always need to be made out of porcelain. They sometimes are made out of glass. They can be made out of wood. They can be very decorative or less decorative. And I'm going to share my screen with you and show you just a couple of other images of Seder plates. So that you can just have a sense of what they look like. So let me share my screen with you for a second. And I'm going to show you this picture, which I will make much larger. This is a metal Seder plate. And this Seder plate has cups, glass cups that are put on top of it, and they have all the ritual foods in this Seder plate. So while I've got this image open, I'm going to explain what all of these things are. Okay. First of all, what you see a lot of green on the Seder plate. You see, in this case, a piece of lettuce, and you see some parsley. Greens are very important on the Seder plate because they symbolize spring. Passover always takes place in the spring, and you always have fresh herbs on the Seder plate. This is an egg, and the egg symbolizes here what it does in an Easter egg, for example, or in other kind of pagan celebrations of spring. Of course, new life. This is a shank bone. It's a shank bone from a lamb, and it is to remember close that off. We are going to remember the story. Okay. I need you please to turn your audio off, please. Okay, please don't turn it on again. Thank you so much. So what we have here again is a shank bone, and this shank bone is a way that in the biblical story that the Jews would mark their doorways with the blood of the lamb so that the angel of death would pass over their houses during the plagues where the firstborn Egyptian was to be killed. So this shank bone is a reminder of that. Then these two ritual foods down here are pretty interesting. This one at the very bottom, which looks kind of hot pink. This in Hebrew is called maror, M-A-R-O-R is how you might spell it. And it is a bitter herb. Usually it's horseradish. And very often the horseradish is mixed with beets to give it that color, but it's very bitter. In this little bowl here, this is called charoset. That's the Hebrew word charoset. And it is a very sweet mixture of apples and usually a sweet wine and some cinnamon and maybe some nuts like a walnut or an almond. And this is to remember the mortar of the bricks that the Jewish slaves were needing to, were building their pyramids with. Okay. So just to get off the share for a second, again, those are the ritual foods that are kept on the Seder plate. And what happens on the Seder plate is that little symbolic moments of those foods, of those different symbols will appear here, but those foods are then eaten by all of the people at the Seder. They are all eaten as part of remembering the story. The parsley that I showed you at one point is dipped into salt water. The salt water is meant to represent the tears and the sweat of the children of Israel, of the Jews, when they were enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh. The charoset, as I said, that apple is meant to represent the mortar. The bitter herbs meant to represent the bitterness of slavery. So all of these foods are ways that we can kind of concretize or symbolize the different parts of the story. And all of those foods are eaten with matzah. So I promised I would talk to you about matzah, and I'm going to show you the big box of matzah that I bought for my family's Passover Seder. You can see a picture of the matzah there on the screen. Matzah is an unleavened kind of cracker. That's how you can imagine it. It's made from flour and water. It's very thin. It's an unleavened bread. And the reason that it's eaten during Passover is because we're told in the book of Exodus that when the Jews were escaping from Pharaoh and escaping their enslavement, they were running and they didn't have any time to bake bread, right? When you put yeast into bread, it takes some time for it to rise. And they didn't have any time for that. They had to just spread this thin dough out on rocks, let the sun bake it, pick it up and run. Okay. So that's kind of the pragmatic reason for eating matzah, but the rabbis now have a bunch of different ideas about it too. They say that the bread that we eat normally that rises kind of puffs up, right? It puffs up, and it reminds us of when we puff ourselves up in arrogance, right? When we forget to be right-sized, when we take up more space in the world than what we deserve. And the matzah is a bread of humility. And it's a bread of reminding us that we need not be puffed up like the slaveholders were, but we need to be humble and to remind ourselves of that humility. So we eat matzah starting on the first night of Passover, which this year is on Friday night. And we eat matzah. The reason why I buy this econo box is because we eat unleavened bread. We eat matzah for 8 days and 8 nights. Okay, so that also means no pasta, no pizza crust, right? No cookies, no cakes, nothing that will have yeast in it. No hot dog buns, right? Some Jews will not eat anything but matzah. Other Jews will eat a corn tortilla. Some Jews will not eat rice because rice also kind of puffs up. Other Jews are like, rice is fine, it doesn't have yeast in it. So different people have different levels of observance, which is fine. Some American Jews do kind of creative things with matzah. Every year I make matzah pizza for my kids. So during Passover, I put a little tomato sauce on it and put some cheese on there, some mushrooms, maybe some black olives, and make a matzah pizza, which is kind of fun. So it's still within the observance, but it's not just eating plain matzah all the time. So again, different people have different levels of observance. And my husband, who is gluten-free, we don't forget about him in our family. They also sell gluten-free matzah, right? This is made in Israel and it's easy to buy here. I just pick some up at my Ralph's. And so he can still follow the observance without making himself sick. So matzah is really the #1 symbol of Passover, okay? And it's on the matzah that we're going to eat the bitter herbs. It's on the matzah that we're going to eat the charoset, which is the sweet stuff, right? And then during the Seder, we make what's called a Hillel sandwich. Hillel, Rabbi Hillel from like the 1st century in the Talmud is the one who came up with this idea. And what he said is we should take 2 little pieces of matzah and put some charoset, which is the sweet appley wine stuff, on one side, and put the maror, which is the very bitter herb, the horseradish, on the other side, so that we remind ourselves of the bitterness of slavery, and we remind ourselves of the sweetness of liberation, but that you have to put them together, because you can never forget the bitterness and you can never forget the sweetness. And that is, by the way, I will say, a very common kind of philosophical trope that exists in Judaism. There's always this kind of both and, right? We're celebrating and we're remembering the pain, right? Even at a Jewish wedding, you might have seen this at a Jewish wedding, or maybe in a movie where it's the happiest possible day, right? But then there's this breaking of the glass. You see the groom who steps on the glass, breaks the glass at the wedding. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of different interpretations, but the real reason, the rabbinic reason, is to remember the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, when Jews were exiled into the diaspora away from the Holy Land once and for all. So even at the highest moment of joy, there is a remembrance of pain. And similarly, in the deepest remembrances of pain, there is a sweetness. So when you go to a Jewish house of mourning, for example, if somebody has died, you bring some cookies or some candy or some sweet fruits, so that the mourners in their deepest moments of grief will remember that there is sweetness also in life. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a second. I've been talking for a long time. I still have, of course, way more things to tell you, but I'm going to stop for a second, and I want to ask if you have any questions about anything that I've said. And by the way, let me say this last thing. I am going to assume that all of your questions come from a place of love. And so you don't need to be worried about offending me or worried about, saying the wrong thing. I am more than happy to answer any well-intentioned question that you have. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you do.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Hi. So when you were a kid, did you look over to this time of year? Was it like a time of gathering with family? Was it positive, or kind of what were your childhood experiences?
That's a great question. And of course, as many people as you ask, there will be many different answers to that, right? I can imagine that some people did not look forward to Pesach. I always love Pesach. In fact, to this day, this is my favorite Jewish holiday. Absolutely my favorite Jewish holiday. And I think part of that is because I was a budding English major even then, and I was really into like symbolism. Like I'm really into symbolism, and all of the Pesach rituals, the Passover rituals, are really all about symbolism. And it's also about telling stories, right? And those are my favorite things, right? Telling stories, reading stories, hearing stories, and then having all of this kind of symbolic resonance in that. And you actually kind of implied this in your question. It was always a time of gathering. When I was young, all of my grandparents would be at the table from both sides, the uncles and aunts, and my grandma used to have the Seder at her home. And we would wear our fancy dresses and get dressed up. I'm sure my brother will tell you that he hated wearing a suit, but I loved getting dressed up. And she would always take out, the fancy china, whatever. It was definitely a big deal. So personally, I have always loved Passover. And I used to love bringing matzah to school in my lunches because the kids were like, can I have some of that? And first I'd be like, I don't know. And by like about day 7, I'd be like, take all of it. I can't eat one more bite of matzah. It's a little much. But I loved it growing up. And now I'm the one who does the big Seder at my house. And in fact, I have my grandmother's china, and I use the same china that she used. And my children, I hope when somebody asks them this question, 20 years from now, they'll give me the same answer that I did. Any other questions so far about Passover that I can answer? Hello there.
Hi. Okay, so I guess the bone that was used to spread the blood, is it just a bone, or is it start with meat on it and then you eat the meat and then you use the bone? Like, is there ever meat on that bone?
There is not.
Okay.
I mean, there was originally when it was
Well,
at
yeah.
the butcher's, but there is no meat as part of part of this. So it's just the bone. And I get it from the butcher, and it never goes in anybody's mouth. It just stays on the Seder plate as kind of a ritual object. And then it usually goes back into the freezer for next year's Seder. So it just gets wrapped up and kind of put in the back of the freezer for a year. So it just sits there as a ritual object. And I will also say that the other foods that are actually on the Seder plate, they also don't go into anybody's mouth from the Seder plate. So there will be a bowl of charoset, the apple stuff. There will be a bowl of maror. There'll be the parsley and eggs and all of that kind of stuff that people will have at their plates, but it will be separate from what's actually on the Seder plate. So what's on the Seder plate sits there all night and is kind of pointed to, but it's not eaten. That was a great question. Anything else? Any other questions so far?
This is Josie Gillen, and I have a question, just what you said right now about
Sure.
the food is not eaten. So what happens to it? Does it get frozen, put away, or what happens to it if no one's going to eat it? You know.
It's just the little parts that are on the Seder plate that are not eaten. So every year, for example, I make charoset. And there's a big bowl of it. The charoset is the apple stuff again that I mentioned. I make a big bowl of it, and people will eat that from the bowl, and it will be gone, after that night or after that week or whatever. The little tiny part that's just on the Seder plate, it sits out all night. So it just gets thrown away. It's just a little bit, and it just gets thrown away.
I
By the
just thought
way,
it was sacred or something. I wasn't sure.
No, it's just it just gets
Symbol.
It's just symbolic. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then we start over every year with the new stuff, except the shank bone. The shank bone is the only thing that I keep, because getting a new shank bone every year is just kind of a pain. So I don't do it.
Okay. Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Jill. It's good to see you. This is
Nice to
great.
see you. Thanks.
Do you have recipes written down that you would share?
That's a phenomenal question. So there are lots of families that have recipes written down. My grandma's matzo ball soup recipe is now in my mom's head. And a couple of years ago, I said to my mom, I need you to write down the recipe. And she's like, there's no recipe, I just do it. So I went to her house and wrote down every single thing she did. So I have it written down. I'm blessed that my mom is still well enough to make the matzo ball soup for the Seder, and that's her job. I don't take it over, but I do have the recipe for when she's no longer able to do that. The charoset there are recipes. There's lots of recipes online, and it's actually really interesting. I'll share this about charoset, that different, Jews are all over the world, right? In the diaspora that I mentioned, Jews went to all different parts of the world. And so as they lived in different parts of the world, especially in different climates, they had access to different foods, right? Now, my family is what's called Ashkenazi, which means from Eastern Europe, right? So my personal relatives are Russian, Romanian, and Austrian. So Eastern Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so the charoset that we make is made from apples and from wine. I mentioned the sweet wine, and I can actually show you the wine that we use. This is called Manischewitz, which is a kosher sweet wine. Okay. And this is Ashkenazi wine. It's kosher for Passover. And by the way, we drink 4 glasses of it during Passover. So you better not be driving for a long time after drinking this wine, but it's very, very sweet. It's definitely an acquired taste. But so this is what I do for my charoset is I chop up apples and walnut and cinnamon. That's it, those 3 things. And then I pour in a ton of this stuff into the bowl, mix it around, more. And then the apples and everything kind of soak it in. I make the charoset usually the night before the Seder so that it has a time to kind of like marinate on itself. So by the time you eat it, it's very sweet and very, it's got this wonderful texture, kind of like the mortar, right? In my family, we just do a little thing where my kids and I chop up all the apples by hand. Other Jews are like, you're crazy, don't you have a food processor? And I'm like, I have a food processor, but this is what we do in our family. And we take the walnuts, this is my kid's favorite part, and you keep them in the package and you whack the walnuts against the table so that they get, you know, very broken up into very small pieces. You mix it all together, and that's my charoset. That's it. People say, how much wine? I don't know. You just pour it until it looks like it's enough, and then you can take some tastes, and then, you know, that's it. But I was going to say that other Jewish traditions make charoset differently. So the Jews who are in Western Europe are called Sephardic Jews, and those are Jews who are in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, Turkey. They didn't have apples so much. They had oranges, dates, figs, and fruits that are more tropical and more typical for the Mediterranean climate. So their charoset, Sephardic charoset, is usually those things that I just mentioned: oranges, figs, dates, sometimes pomegranates, and sometimes some different spices as well, and also mixed together. It just has to be sweet. It has to be super, super sweet in order to make sure that it goes in the Hillel sandwich and it combats the horseradish. So there's lots of recipes online. I've tried all kinds of different ones, but because, like, to go back to Anne's question, because of my childhood memories and the way that I was growing up, I only make the Ashkenazi charoset because to me, that's the real kind.
This is Josie. I have another question. You just said 4 glasses of wine. So what does 4 symbolize?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of 4s in the Passover Seder, a lot of them. So the 4 cups of wine, there are also, so that means that we say the blessing over the wine, by the way, 4 times, okay? 2 of them happen before the meal and 2 of them happen after the meal. So the Seder service continues after the meal and there's more stuff, okay? Before the meal, there's a very important part of the service called the 4 questions. The 4 questions is a very important part of the Seder. They are usually asked by the youngest member of the family there. And the 4 questions basically ask why the Seder and why the meal is different from all other nights of the year. So they're usually sung in Hebrew, and then they are translated in English. So would you like to hear just a little bit of what it sounds like, the 4 questions? I'm not the youngest one in the family anymore, but I can tell you what they sound like. So by the way, I'm going to read them from a Haggadah. Haggadah is a special prayer book that is that everybody has a copy of at the table, and there are lots of different Haggadahs, lots and lots of them. By the way, the word Haggadah comes from the verb to tell, as in to tell a story. So that's what it means. And I mean, I probably know these by heart, but I'll look for the 4 questions in here. Okay, so the first word of this thing that I'll sing to you is ma, which means what? Okay. And the next word is nishtana, which means like what is different. So it sounds like this. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, mikol halelot, shebechol halelot, anu ochlin chametz umatzah, chametz umatzah, halayla hazeh kulo matzah. So that's just the first question. And what it meant was, why is tonight, the first part is, why is tonight different from all other nights? And then the first answer was, on all other nights, we eat chametz, which is regular bread, or matzah. But on this night, we eat only matzah. Okay, so there are 4 questions that children ask. And that is one of the 4s, okay, that Josie asked about. The other major 4 is that during part of the telling of the story, there is the kind of inset story of the 4 children. These are not literal children. These are types of children. The 4 children, and the 4 children are the wise child, the simple child, the rebellious child, and the silent child, right? And what the rabbis teach us, of course, is that we all have all 4 of those children in us at all times. Sometimes we're wise, sometimes we're not so wise, sometimes we're inquisitive, sometimes we're too fearful to be inquisitive. And so these 4 children have to be told the story of the Exodus in different ways. The wise child says, tell me why we do this whole Seder and what's the story? What's the meaning of all of this? The rebellious child, or the evil child, says, why is this story so important to you? And builds in an othering. Okay. The simple child says, what are we doing? What's even going on? And the silent child doesn't speak. And the teaching behind that is that we need to make sure that we answer all sides of us, right? The wise side, the rebellious side, the simple side, and the hesitant or reticent side. And we tell the story in all different ways. So lots and lots of 4s. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the use of wine at the Passover Seder while I'm at it. So besides drinking the wine, we also have a part of the service where we detract from our cup of joy. And we detract for our cup of joy when we recount the plagues. These are the 10 plagues of Egypt that God brings upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians when they keep people enslaved and they keep refusing to let people go, right? So if you've read anything in the Old Testament, or if you've seen the great old story, the great movie, what is it, the Cecil B. DeMille version, you've probably seen those plagues, right? So you remember what those plagues are. They go from bad to worse, really. And so what happens is, at some point in the service, we have our glass of wine, and we literally, with our finger, usually our pinky, will take out a drop of wine and put on our plate for every plague that befell the Egyptians. Because even though the Egyptians were the oppressors, they were still human beings and they suffered. So this is what we would do. We would say, blood, put a drop on the table. Frogs, put a drop on the table. Lice, put a drop on the table, not the table, the plate, right? I mean, not the tablecloth. Beasts, right? Boils, all of this kind of stuff. And the last one is the death of the firstborn. And they put a drop on the plate. So we've detracted from our cup of joy. In my family, at my Seder, which I lead, we do it twice. We detract from our cup of joy with the biblical plagues, and then we detract from our cup of joy with what I call the modern plagues. And so I'll read those to you as well, just so you know what we do. We detract for the making of war, the teaching of hate and violence, despoliation of the earth, perversion of justice in government, fomenting of vice and crime, neglect of human needs, oppression of nations and peoples, corruption of culture, subjugation of science, learning, and human discourse, and the erosion of freedoms. And the reason that we do that is because it's really deeply tied to the reason that Passover is such a resonant holiday for modern Jews today. And that is that it is crucial in Judaism, and I might even say for all of humanity, that we remember the fact that there are still people who are enslaved in the world, and that we have to continue to tell the story of enslavement until everybody is free from any kind of enslavement. And that could mean physical enslavement, that could mean mental or emotional enslavement, that could mean any kind of oppression or suppression that exists. And so the reason that we eat the bread of affliction, and the reason that we detract from our cups, and the reason that we take both ancient and modern ideas of what plagues us, is because the main dictate of Passover is that we have to remember that we were slaves in Egypt, and that there are still slaves today. And that's what makes this so resonant. So in my Haggadah, this is my personal Haggadah that I put together for my family. I have all kinds of social justice readings. We don't just read from the Old Testament. I have poetry. I have parts of slave memoirs. I have parts of, songs, spirituals, all kinds of ways for us to think about how slavery is still enmeshed in our world today. So that's, I know I kind of took it far away, Josie, from what you were asking about the 4 cups of wine, but all of this stuff is really deeply, deeply enmeshed. Oh, and I'm going to say one more thing about wine, because this is my Zoom and I can. So the last thing I wanted to tell you is that there's also another wine, a cup of wine on the table, which is filled with wine and not touched by anybody at the table. And that glass is the cup for Elijah. So Elijah is Eliyahu in Hebrew. This is, Elijah is the messenger or the prophet who is believed to be the one who will herald the messianic age, right? Who will bring the world to a more elevated, not bring it, but who will announce the world coming to an elevated state. And so there's this idea that that if you leave a cup for Elijah, that he will come, right? That the spirit of Elijah will come to the Seder. And in fact, the children at the Seder will even go and open the door at a certain point in the Seder to welcome the spirit of Elijah. Well, at my Seder, we do a thing where we take Elijah's cup, where I only half fill it, And then I pass it around to every person at the Seder who takes their own glass of wine and puts some of their wine into Elijah's cup. And the symbol of that is to acknowledge that if we think that we're going to have some sort of messianic age, then we have to bring it about ourselves. That this is not something that's going to come to us. This is not something that is going to like show up in the mail, right? That what Jews believe is that the messianic age will be created by the people on earth in their love and connection to each other. So what I ask everybody at the Seder to do is think about what they're going to do in their year to help to hasten the messianic age, to help to hasten a better world. And they will pour a little bit of their cups into the cup of redemption. So lots and lots of symbolism with the wine. And this is why I have to have lots of bottles of these for my Seder.
Thank you, Doctor, very much. It was just amazing, everything you just said. It's very beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Other questions? You guys must have more. Hi, Mika, go ahead.
I'm trying to find it. I was so moved by everything you just said about the dipping, even for the oppressors, because you remember their humanity. So all the plagues that they experienced, I love that. And then you were giving the modern day plagues, and I just, all of them, they just hit me. But then the one I just didn't understand, and I wanted to know if you could explain it. You said the subjugation of science and modern discourse. If you could just elaborate a little bit about what that means. I think I have an idea, but still.
It means censorship. It means whitewashing. It means only telling half the story. It means looking at science or learning or discourse as ways of generating profit instead of ways of provoking additional thought and learning. And so it means that when we subjugate our speech, or we subjugate our learning, or our knowledge is subjugated, it means we don't have a free and clear understanding of the world that we live in. So I think that's how I would explain that.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Anything else? Anne, hi.
Yeah, you brought up the old movie with the 10 plagues. I was curious how you feel about different media representations.
My dad watched that movie every single year when it came on TV. Before streaming, before VHS, all that stuff, when we all have to watch movies on TV, all cut up and chopped up, they played it every year. It's great. It's kitschy and cheesy, and the special effects are terrible. I mean, I think they made the Red Sea out of Jello or something like that, and then like reversed the film. It's great. It's it's a movie. Prince of Egypt is a more recent animated film, musical actually, that tells the story. It's great. But I'm not an observant, super observant Jew. I mean, I'm sure that if you asked a traditional Jew what they thought about those movies, they would say that they're terrible. But a traditional Jew would also tell you that everything that happens in the Bible is historically real. I'm not going to make that claim for myself. That's not my belief. That's not my practice. To me, the entire Bible is a storybook. It's a great one. There's lots of great stories and lots of important discussion to be had, but you're never going to hear me say that scientifically the Red Sea definitely parted. That's not my belief. So movies, great. it's all good. If it sparks a discussion and teaches us something, it's wonderful. I mean, to me, you know, the story of the parting of the Red Sea is really important for actually what Mika, for what you just brought up too. When we think that there's another moment that's in Jewish thought where when the Jews cross on dry land, right? And then the Egyptians are in pursuit of them, and the water closes over them, right? And they drown. And then on the other side, Moses and Aaron and all the Jews and Miriam are dancing and singing praise. And the story is that God says to them, my creatures just perished and you sing praises? Right? So like, okay, it had to happen. The Jews had to get out of there, and some Egyptians had to die for that to happen. But when people and animals, right, die, even though they're the oppressors, that these are still, you know, these are still creations of God, and that it's problematic. So what I love about, well, Judaism in general, but especially the stories that we tell around Passover, is that they're deeply problematic. They are, right? The whole thing is problematized, right? Moses is like, you know, comes out of the river and like nobody knows who he is and who's his real parentage, and that he's raised in the palace, and there's this whole thing about class, right? And there's this whole thing about, right, how some people are spared and some people are not. And I mean, it's intended to be a difficult narrative that that demands that we tell the story again and again so that we can really face it, right? Don't forget, Moses didn't even want to be Moses anyway, right? God had to come to Moses like 5 times and say, you're the guy. And Moses was like, I am not the guy, right? I have a speech impediment. I don't speak very well. I'm not very smart. I'm this, I'm that. Like, I don't want to do it. And God's like, no, you're doing it. And he's like, I'm not. Please don't choose me, right? I mean, that in itself is problematic, right? So I mean, that's the Old Testament. You got to know that. The Hebrew Bible is just filled with problematic situations. And it goes all the way to Job, all the way, right? Which is, I mean, if you know anything about Job, talk about a problematic story, holy cow, right? So, you know, I guess I would say, I mean, that Jews don't really settle for simple answers. That's just not a thing in Judaism. It really is not a thing. And in fact, the word Israel itself, Yisrael, you remember Jacob, he changes his name to Israel, right, in the Bible. The Yisrael in Hebrew means one who struggles with God. That is what it means, right? One who struggles with all of this. But it also means, the same letters means one who sings of God. The same exact letters in Hebrew. So that's it. Remember I told you about the whole like sweetness and bitterness, good times, bad times, right? We're celebrating, but we're also mourning the Egyptians who were killed. You know, we struggle with God, we sing God. That's the journey. And all of that is deeply enmeshed in this holiday, deeply enmeshed in the holiday. I can't even remember what your question was. Oh, how do I like the movies? I like them. Who else has a question?
I have a question. Are we going to have part 2 on the history of the Jewish people, especially, you know, like the traditions when they die and the cutting of the clothes, sitting on the, I think
I
that
can
in itself is
certainly
a,
do a thing about life cycle events in Judaism. If
yes.
that's interesting to you. I don't
Oh,
know if
gosh.
tonight,
No,
but
but yeah, part 2.
part 2, yeah, actually funeral rituals are really quite beautiful, and
Yes.
and yeah, life cycle is a whole different thing. But the Jews are big on ritual, big
Yes.
on ritual. We really get a lot of meaning from doing things in a symbolic kind of way.
Yes.
Oh, it's nice to see your face, Josie. Thank you.
Yes, so sorry, I was having dinner.
That's okay.
But yeah, it's just so fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else that I can answer yet before I give you just a little bit more scoop on the Seder?
Can you spell that, Seder?
Yeah, well, it's a Hebrew word, but in English we would spell it Seder.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it means order. It means order in Hebrew. So there's an order of things. And just as a side note, the same root is in the word Sidur. So Seder and Sidur. A Sidur is a prayer book that you would have in a synagogue. Again, that has like a certain order of the prayers. So the S, D, and R sounds become Seder and Sidur. I have a couple of images of a Seder table that I just wanted to show you. I just stole from Google Images, but just so you could kind of see what a Seder table might look like in a home. That's not it. I just showed you that. If you take a look at this image, this is what a Seder table might look like from above. But you can see a lot of the same stuff that we talked about. So hang on, I'm going to annotate this for you with a little pen. Okay, so can you guys see this red circle that I'm drawing? That's the Seder plate, right? So again, you can see here's the shank bone, and then there's the egg, and then this is the moror, which is the bitter herb. This one doesn't have beet in it, which means it's even more bitter. This is the stuff that would like make smoke come out of your nostrils and your ears if you ate it. This is the parsley, which we dip in the salt water, and this is the charoset. And you can see here's a bowl of the charoset, right? So remember we were talking about how we don't eat it directly off the Seder plate, that's kind of the ritual stuff. But here's a bowl of it that they're going to pass around. And then over on this side, this is the matzah that's out. And this tin here is filled with matzah because people are going to be eating matzah the whole time that they're in the Seder and then in the meal. And then there's just lots of matzah. You can see here, this looks like a metal Elijah's cup. So this is the cup of redemption that we were talking about, and it's on a nice tray there. So our beautiful white tablecloth doesn't get red wine all over it. And then you can see at every table that there's a Haggadah, right? Everybody has a service in front of them that they'll read from. And then this, I don't know if you can see this little thing right here. This is a weird word. It's actually a Greek word that says afikomen. And the afikomen is a special piece of the matzah. It's this piece, the middle piece of the matzah that's on the table, where the Seder leader takes the afikomen and breaks it in half. And he puts part of it into this little envelope. And then he hides it somewhere in the house. And then the children at the end of the meal have to go and find it. And they bring it back to the Seder leader, who has to buy it back because we can't officially end the Seder until we have the afikomen. So we're going to have a toy or some sort of treat or a prize or some money or whatever to give to the kids once they find the afikomen, and it goes into that little, whatever that is, a little folder or a little bag or whatever. And then we can finish the Seder once you get the afikomen. So that's a very, very fun thing. I'll just tell you really quickly that one of my memories is my grandfather when Seder was his house, he would always say, I'm going to go wash my hands. And that would be when he would hide the afikomen. So my brother and I would sit at the table, and my brother would say, I have to go to the bathroom. No, nobody gets up from the table when grandpa's washing his hands. So he would go hide the afikomen somewhere in the house. And then my brother and I would just wait, and we'd eat our whole dinner really quickly because we couldn't wait for the time where we could go play hide and go seek and go find the afikomen. So I'm not entirely sure whether looking for hidden Easter eggs in the grass is something that kind of like came from searching from the afikomen. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if there's some sort of traditional, threading from one of those things to the other. But I'm going to show you one other Seder table just as a comparison. This is another Seder table, which has, again, a Seder plate. This one, again, is metal and glass. You can see that the same things exist. We have the bone, we have the charoset. This Seder table actually has a full piece of horseradish here. That's actually a piece of horseradish, which is where the bitter herb is made. And then again, we have our greens, and then we have the egg. So there's always these things. Here's the charoset. Here's the other bitter herb. So and then this will be the salt water here. So there's always those same elements on the Seder plate. And isn't this lovely? This has a little flour and the matzah. I think I got this off Pinterest. Very, very cool. And this here will be the Haggadah that will be used at the table. So just a couple of.
I had a quick question.
Yeah. Go
on
ahead.
The previous dinner setting, there was just one blue glass wine. Well, is that for Elijah, or the previous picture that you had? It was just
look at it. Hang on.
It was just one glass, and it was blue. So.
Oh yeah, that would be Elijah's cup. Yes,
okay,
definitely. That would be Elijah's cup. And in my home, Elijah's cup is different from the rest of the glasses of wine that we use too. Do you guys want to see my Elijah's cup? I'll show it to you. So this is the cup that we use. It's pewter and glass, and it has a really pretty kind of tree motif. And so this is the cup that we'll use for Elijah, and everybody else at the table will just have a regular wine glass. So okay. This is what we use. You don't have to have a special cup for Elijah. Some people don't have a special one. That you can just do whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as you have one for Elijah, it can be a plastic tumbler. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be anything. What else can I answer for you?
Do you have to have a chair for Elijah too, or just a cup?
Just a cup, because Elijah, sometimes people have a chair, but mostly the family will open the door. And so the idea is that Elijah kind of comes in and, graces the Seder with the idea of the Messianic age. And I'll tell you something else about opening the door. There is another major part of that service where we say, let all who are hungry come and eat. It's not only opening the door to the idea of the Messianic age, but it's opening the door to need right now. Very, very often as part of Jewish holidays, there will be the idea of giving. So during Passover, oftentimes families will give to homeless shelters, right? Or we'll give to, we'll just give, right? The idea of giving, but especially around food. right? With Passover. So give to a food pantry or give to a shelter or go and give some time and do some volunteering at the Midnight Mission or something like that. The idea that there are still people who are enslaved by poverty, there are people who are enslaved by food insecurity or being unhoused. And so those kinds of slaveries are things that we also need to remember. So we have these lavish meals, right? The idea is that we have to put it out the door too, and let in those who still suffer. Robin.
Yes, I'm curious as to whether there is any special music associated with Passover.
That's a great question. The answer is yes. Many of the songs that are sung at the Seder are prayers. Many of the songs are songs, literally just songs. Sometimes somebody will have a guitar or something like that, but usually people just sing around the table. At my personal Seder, we always sing Go Down Moses, which is a Black spiritual from that tells the story of the Exodus, but that is composed and sung by African-American slaves in this country. Not all Jews will do that. Some will, some won't. Some will sing in Hebrew, some will sing in English. There's always a song at the very end, which is sung in Hebrew, and it's called Lashana Haba'ah, which in Hebrew means in the coming year or in the year to come. And what we say is, this year we are still in enslavement. Next year may all be free. This year we are still in diaspora and in exile. Next year in Jerusalem. And that doesn't literally mean that everybody needs to go to Jerusalem, but it means that there should be a freer, more accepting, more open society in the next year. So those are often the final songs that are sung. And in lots of Haggadot, in lots of the different Haggadahs, there will be songs in the back that people will sing, and everybody has the words, and there you go. See here, this is just one example, but here's your next year in Jerusalem page. This is the last page, and there's in almost every Haggadah, it will say something like, in every generation. This is from the Talmud. This line from the Talmud, which is, you know, ancient Jewish commentary, says, in every generation we should see ourselves as if we personally came out from Egypt. So we constantly remember what it meant to be enslaved, and we constantly remember what it means to be free. Does that answer the music question for you, Robin?
It does. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You know, I'll share something else with you guys too, which I think is really cool. So the word for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim, okay? And interestingly, there's a plural ending on that word. I mean, it means Egypt, but there's a plural ending. The im part means more than one, okay? And the root of the word Mitzrayim is from the Hebrew word sar, which means narrow. Okay, it literally means narrow or narrowness. So Egypt is called by the writers of the Torah, of the Bible, the places of narrowness, right? The narrow places. And that means geographically narrow, I suppose, but really, again, it's much more symbolic than that, right? And so when modern Jews talk about celebrating Passover, we talk about not only Egypt, but our own Mitzrayim. What are our own places of narrowness from which we need to be redeemed, right? What are our own our own places of oppression from which we need to be redeemed. And so very often you'll hear people say, you know, when they say happy Passover, may you be delivered from Mitzrayim, right? May you be redeemed. May you find freedom from narrowness. It doesn't mean the narrowness of the Torah. It means the narrowness of today, right now, where you are in your life that is narrow and oppressive. So that's a beautiful image. That's all over the Haggadah. Robin, did you have something else? I see your hand is up.
Oh, no, I just forgot to take it down.
That's okay.
Thank you.
No, that's fine.
This has been so fascinating.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Does anybody else have anything, any other questions that they'd like to ask or comment? Yeah, Mika, go ahead.
Would you say that word again? I love that. Mitzrayim or Grahim?
Mitzrayim. I'll put it in the chat the way that we would write it in English. Of course, it's a Hebrew word, but Mitzrayim. My spell check's not going to like that, but here it is. The TZ sound is the same kind of sound like in the word pizza. Mitzrayim is our narrow places. And here's the word Seder that you were asking about before that I'll just put in the chat for you for spelling.
That was a sermon right there. Where are those places that we need to be delivered from? I mean, I'm like, wow. If you do a sermon on that, let me know. I would love
I feel like I just did.
Look, you know what? That's true. You did. You did. Amen.
Anything else that I can answer for you about Pesach, Passover, the meal, the story, any of it? Okay, so I'm going to just close then with one more reading, if you don't mind. This is a reading that is in my own family's Haggadah that I'd love to share with you. And this is how we end our Seder. So this is how I'll end our talk tonight too. I did not write this, but it's called A Toast of Thankfulness. And the last word, by the way, of this piece is called, the last word of this is l'chaim. I don't know if you guys have heard that word. So maybe you've seen like in a movie, somebody will raise their glass and say l'chaim, right? L'chaim means to life. But also there's that same ending on it, im. Remember I said mitzrayim, this is chayim. There is, in the toast to life, what we're really saying is to lives, to everybody's lives. It's plural. All right. So that's the last word of this piece. The rest is in English. I'll share it with you. A toast of thankfulness to where we've each come from, to where we're going and how we're changing, to being where we are and who we are, to what we can share, to what we can't share yet, to process and the times we lose sight of process, to pain, to growth, to painless growth, to painful growth, to our efforts, our faith, our determination, to our fears, ears, laughter, hugs, and kisses, to wisdom, to study, alone and in groups, to our books and tools, to toys, to materials raw and fine, to work, to meetings, to sleep, to our eyes, which fortunately read Haggadahs, and see mountains and faces and flowers and bodies and occasionally sunshine. To our ears, hands, noses, mouths, toes, to caresses, to touch, to our senses, to our knees, to the times we fall down and pick ourselves up, and the times friends help us up, to the shoulders we cry on, to the arms that hold us, to the strength in each of us alone, to our work, to our play, to our loving, to our growth, to life itself, l'chaim. So let me bless you with a wonderful spring season and whatever that means for you in your own practice. And let me thank you so very much for your attendance and your questions and your shares. And I'll stay on for a little bit longer if anybody has any additional questions. But thank you all so much, and Chag Sameach, happy holidays. And thank you so much. Be well.
I've got a question.
Yes, please.
I haven't heard you mention any kind of term for God. I think you have Elohim, which is also plural by the sounds of things.
It certainly is.
Is there any mention of God in most of these celebrations?
Oh, yes, for sure. So the word that is, the words that are almost always used for God in Jewish prayer and in the Torah is Adonai. Adonai is the spoken way of pronouncing the tetragram, and the tetragram in English is like Yahweh is what is kind of used. Yahweh is just an Anglicization of the Hebrew letters that are written for God's name. But the way that they're written in Hebrew is that they're not pronounceable. It's like the unpronounceable name of God. So what we say instead is Adonai, which is pronounceable. Adonai in Hebrew actually literally means my Lord or my God. And so in most prayers, we'll say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. So Baruch Atah means blessed are you. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, our God. Eloheinu means our God. Melech, king or ruler, haolam, of the world. So every single time we do a prayer over the wine, a prayer over anything, a prayer over the matzah, a prayer over the maror, a prayer over the Hillel sandwich. I mean, there's a prayer over almost every single thing, and it will always start by saying, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. So in prayer, Adonai Eloheinu, but you're right, Elohim. And you're exactly right about that too. Elohim has a plural ending. So even though it's translated as God, the pluralization of it kind of implies that there is a more than one way to understand God, right? Some people will say that the plural side is a gender kind of duality, so that there's a masculine side of God and a feminine side of God. Some people will say that it has to do with kind of God of the heavens versus God of the earth. I mean, there are a million different ways that people read and interpret that. But those words, Adonai and Elohim or Eloheinu, which makes it possessive to us, our God, those words are all over the Haggadah. In terms of the Torah or the Hebrew Bible, there are other names for God as well. One is Shaddai, which is a kind of a famous one. Sometimes God is referred to as Hamakom, which Makom means the place, literally means place. So sometimes God is referred to as the capital T, capital P place. Lots of different terms, but I'm going to say that Adonai and Elohim or Eloheinu are the biggies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. What else?
That was a great question. I'm glad you
That
asked
was a
that.
good question. Yeah. You know, one of the things about Judaism is that there are no visual representations of God, right? So if you enter a church, you will see the figure of Jesus in some way, right? Very often, maybe in paint, maybe in sculpture, right? Certainly in a Catholic church, you'll see the figure of the crucified Christ on the crucifix, right? In a Protestant church, you won't see that, but you might see, you know, something else. Jewish synagogues don't have that. There is no picture of God. And so even though in the Old Testament, sometimes God's body parts are mentioned, like you might hear like the hand of God, right? Or the face of God, right? It is never depicted any more than in language. And you might even remember that at one point, Moses says to God, he says, I got to see your face, right? I got to see you because I got to go back to these people and tell them something real because they're asking a lot of questions about you and you're not giving me very much information here, right? That I can take back to the people, right? And I don't know if you remember what God says, but basically what God says is you may not see my face, but I will pass all of my goodness before you. But I will pass my goodness before you. So the whole idea of God having names and all of that kind of stuff, it's not at all surprising that there's this kind of plurality to it, because, you know, there's no concept in Judaism that God has ever taken a human form more than any other human form. So there is the idea that all human beings are made in the image of God. It says that in Genesis, right? That Tselem Elohim is what it says in Hebrew, in the image of God. That's all human beings, right? So other than that, there's no sense of there having been a human version, I guess, of the source of creation. So there are different words, different names, and different interpretations. So one of the best things in the world is to ask kids in a Jewish Sunday school to draw a picture of God, because they're going to draw their family, or they're going to draw a tree or a rainbow, or maybe an old man with a white beard, right? But there's really no depiction and no set interpretation for Jews of what that is.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
We just saw the 10 Commandments on TV today or the day before. What do you think of that movie?
Well, somebody asked me that earlier. I think it's great. I mean, who doesn't love Yul Brynner, right? As the Pharaoh. Right. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love Charlton Heston in that iconic scene? I mean, they're actors, but it's great. It's fun. It's, you know, and of course, the older the movie gets, the kitschier it is. Mm-hmm. It's not Torah, but it's a blockbuster film. And so great. You know, I'm all about it. It's fun.
Okay, I guess that's what you were talking about, and I missed what the subject was.
Yeah, that's okay.
I apologize.
No, not at all. Not at all. Anything else? Thanks so much, Mika, for coming.
Thank you very much, very much.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciated your
Yeah, thank
questions and your
you.
comments, and thank you very much for giving me so much of your evening. And be well. Enjoy. Take care. Good night.
Good night. Yeah, I saw that.